Your differences have made you what you are. Most smart leaders realize that it's the differences that kind of build a stronger fabric. Different experiences, different cultural backgrounds, different educational paths, different industries. All of those experiences help you make better decisions. So really embrace your differences, use them in your favor, and never be afraid to offer big ideas.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Accolite Podcast, where we focus on industry leaders as they share the unique experiences that shape their careers, the lessons they learned along the way, and their perspectives on the latest tech trends, leadership, and strategy. I'm your host, Manoj Jazra, and I lead global marketing and strategy at Accolite. Today, I'm excited to introduce you our guest, Joan Kuehl. Joan Kuehl is an accomplished CIO with a focus on technology-driven businesses. She has worked with major brands like Elevate, Travelers, Bank of America, and Sabre. With over 3 decades of experience as a top executive, CIO, and technology leader, Joan has delivered technology products to support businesses and their customers in a variety of sectors, including financial services and travel. She has also built and led high-functioning teams throughout her career. In this episode, we'll be talking about her inspiring journey as a CIO and experiences that helped shape her career and have played a key role in her success. Welcome, Joan. It's so great to have you as our guest today.
Thank you so much, Manoj. I was thrilled to join you. I heard last week's podcast, and I was anxious to meet with you.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. We'd love to hear a bit about your journey. So can you share, you've had so many stops along the way in some major organizations. So what does that look like if you kind of reflect on the last number of years?
Oh, yeah, sure. I started out, right out of college with a computer science degree, and most people will not even remember this, but I was an 8080 assembler programmer fresh out of school.
Wow.
Worked with a company called NCR, who was big into like ATMs at the time. And one of my assignments there was we were building self-service terminals for new industries. So we were building self-service for things like gas station pumps or airline check-in. So I got to participate in that. And as part of my responsibility, I actually brought the airline self-service terminal into American Airlines to be certified and put on their network. And in the course of working with them, they actually offered me a job. So I moved over to American Airlines, where I actually spent half of my career. I spent 22 years at American and then spun out into a company called Sabre that was the technology arm of American, but ended up being a technology provider for the whole travel industry. And really, as I said, I spent the bulk of my career there and did virtually every tech job that you could do there. I had the opportunity to work across, every line of business and every technology stack. Really interesting time. And it was great. In my 20s and 30s, I got a chance to, see the world. We were going around the world installing systems for various airlines and travel agencies. So it was a great job in my 20s and 30s. After 2 decades, though, there, I decided I better move on and do something else, and kind of intentionally decided to go into financial services. It was something that had interested me. And so I got a job with Bank of America in Charlotte, where I was responsible for kind of business-facing technologies in their treasury clients. We did a lot of self-service kind of work for their technology or their business clients. After a few years of doing that, I was asked to move over to the consumer bank and lead all of their kind of online banking, mobile banking, all of their consumer-facing technology products. So that was a great experience, a lot of scale to learn about, really interesting experiences in things like cybersecurity, just computing at scale. I spent 7 years at Bank of America and then had an opportunity to move up to Travelers to help them really kind of launch their consumer-facing technologies. They were woefully behind in kind of the digital space, as were most insurance businesses. So it was really nice to help them kind of build up practices across all of their lines of business in web, mobile, and social. And they actually got to use social for some really different things other than marketing. It helped in investigating claims. It helped in underwriting. It was really kind of interesting uses of some of the new technologies. And then finally, I had an opportunity to move back to Dallas, where I kind of started my career with a very small fintech company called Elevate. It was the first time I had worked for a company before it went public. And it was a whole different experience, but one I was really glad to have. It was great to work for a small company and kind of roll my hands up again and get into things. So I had such a lucky and interesting career, and all of it obviously in technology, but was a terrific chance for me to try and learn lots of different things.
So cool. And what was your favorite stop as you were traveling around in your 20s and 30s with Sabre and American?
Oh gosh, I loved New Zealand. I loved London. I loved several places in the Middle East. We did a ton of work in everywhere, did a ton of work in India and Pakistan and lots of places. So I wish I had one favorite place, but gosh, I got a chance to work on every continent but Antarctica.
Oh,
So
wow.
a lot of fun. Yeah.
It's interesting as you were kind of reflecting, and I was thinking about it. The you pioneered a lot of work in terms of, especially for Bank of America and American transition to Sabre. So a lot of us now are obviously taking systems and upgrading them into whether new interfaces, new customer experiences. But you pioneered probably a lot of things that are still used today, I would imagine.
We did. We really had the chance to bring some new technologies, and that's probably one of the coolest thing. And it's been interesting to watch it evolve. Some of those new technologies have evolved a lot over the last 20 years. So it's been great to see them from their inception all the way through kind of maturity.
Thank you. So another question for you, as a senior executive, and you've held many senior executive roles, I would love to hear about a time where you dealt with a really particularly challenging situation. Trying to really figure out how did you navigate that and the lessons you learned, because those are the things like that are what make us stronger as we go forward. And so for our listeners, I'm just trying to figure out is what's your version of that, so you can share that story and what lessons you learned from that as well.
Wow. Yeah, great question. I've had lots of challenges over the years, some probably better suited to talking about in public than others. But as you were asking that, one thing that really occurred to me was I remember coming into an organization once and taking over a team, and it became clear really early that this team was viewed as kind of second class. The whole technology organization was viewed as second class, as really just kind of order takers to the business, and really didn't have a seat at the table. And frankly, the technology team wasn't exerting its own influence and in that arena. So it was a tough journey. It took probably 3 years of hard work, both building some of the capabilities up within the technology team, but also kind of evangelizing that in the business community. So the business owners started to see us as equal partners and as someone who could bring ideas to the table and who could bring technologies that could really further the business. So it was hard work for a lot of us. And, frankly, a lot of us as technologists aren't very good at marketing, aren't very good at telling our own stories or tooting our own horns. And I wasn't. And so that's something that I would really encourage all technologists to do, is really be able to tell your story crisply and explain to your business partners how your technology is helping the business, and how the things that you've achieved have made a real impact. So it was great. After it was 3 years of hard work, but in the end, our business partners invited us to the table, expected us to be there. We had honed some skills in kind of consultation and how to bring new ideas to the table. And they actually stopped calling us IT and started calling us product development, which I thought was a really great step.
That's a major shift, and I can kind of reflect on that as well. Like early in my career, I remember at WestJet, so airline, telco, Shaw Communications, and even on my last role at hospitality, it felt like, to me, my partners in technology, they were like the backbone of my success, and I was on the business side, and I I think it was important for me to actually even be their brand themselves, so that it says that not only did I help deliver something, it was in partnership with my peers that together we
Mm.
delivered something. I felt that once we changed that and our relationship strengthened, we actually worked even more successfully, because then we were in it together. And it was not just, I'm going to pass on my requirements to IT, air quotes, and they'll deliver it.
Yeah.
It was like, how can you help me deliver the most successful implementation of digital or technology, whatever have you?
Yes, you're right. It really is. When those two teams work together, it truly, the synergy is amazing, and you really can produce so much more. So I'm glad you experienced the same thing.
Yes. So reflecting back again to now looking at Bank of America, and I'm sure you had memorable projects, and I'm sure there was a ton of them. Is there something that was involved that helped you as you thought about a memorable project that involved preparing the organization for a really significant, like say, technology shift? And I'm also trying to understand, were there strategies that you use to manage expectations to ensure like a smooth transition? And really, the foundation of this question is, we know that it's hard to actually first to do the technology strategy. It might even be hard to implement the change management to let it go in smoothly and then actually use the technology as you go forward? Are there times in the Bank of America days you can think of something around that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the one that comes to mind most vividly is when we introduced the first mobile banking app. This was on the consumer side of the bank and kind of my last assignment there. And it was very early 2000s. And so we did a lot of work to try to think through what were the risks and what were the considerations and what would the adoption be like. And I'll be honest, we got some of them, we knew some of them, but some of them we learned as we went along. It was a really interesting shift, things like security. You knew that was going to be a huge concern. So we really put a lot of thought into the security considerations and what happened if somebody left their phone in a cab when they were in the middle of a transaction, or if somebody was looking over their shoulder as they did something. So a lot of focus on security. But then as we went along, I didn't anticipate, anybody who's worked in financial services know that governance and risk organizations are incredibly risk averse, as they should be. But they put us through a number of paces. They were really worried about the risks that could be incurred, some security, but others as well as we went out with the mobile app. So I remember at one point we spent weeks kind of arguing with them about, they were afraid of the information that we would display on someone's phone, and someone could be sitting next to them and see it. Someone could be, in a meeting and see it. And one of my business partners actually had the idea. He went to one of the big ATM lobbies in New York City, and there were just thousands of slips of paper. People would get their receipt from the ATM and throw it on the floor. And so he picked up dozens of these pieces of paper and brought it back to our next meeting with the risk and people to show them that all the information on those slips of paper was exactly what we would be displaying on the phone. So we quickly started to make some progress then. But then there were other considerations we didn't even anticipate. Back then there weren't a lot of transactional financial apps available on the market. Frankly, it was mostly games. So I remember when we went to one of the app stores, they talked about, okay, if you want to release a new app or do an update, we work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Oh, and we take 2 weeks off at Christmas. And we started to tell them that's not going to work. If we have a security flaw or something else comes up, we need 24/7. So it was really interesting to kind of work through with the app stores as they matured too, to include, financial apps and other kind of security focused apps. So that was interesting. And then I guess my last surprise was when it actually got into the user's hands and they were using it. We didn't anticipate how much usage would change and the quantity of, how often people would come in. In the past, even through their online banking app on their PCs, on average, a person would check their balance 3.5 times a month. Once they started using a mobile app, they were actually checking it 2.2 times per day.
Unbelievable.
It really just changed the way people used it. In fact, I remember somebody telling me that after mobile apps were introduced, more than half of banking users, checking account users, stopped keeping a check register. They just used their mobile app to kind of keep up with them and tell them how much they had in their account. So some of those things we anticipated and we were prepared for. Others, we really just had to kind of adapt on the fly and, handle things as they came up. You've probably had similar experiences bringing mobile and other things into enterprises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have. And before I kind of dive into that, it makes me, I hope that you had some kind of really elastic infrastructure to handle that kind of load change as well, from like obviously once every or twice a month to like 3 times a day.
We were scrambling. This wasn't the day, we weren't cloud-based yet. So we were scrambling to lay in more capacity and to figure out how to prioritize things. We got it done, but it was a scramble.
That's awesome. What a cool story. My days, like when we launched the first airline app for WestJet in Canada, first of all, it was a really difficult discussion because I think as consumers' expectations were changing, and this was like in kind of 2012, the organization wanted me to launch with something with can you just launch a flight status app?
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine what that would mean to consumers when they had, as you guys were doing, like years ahead of us in terms of capabilities that you delivered. So for me, from a consumer perspective, customer experience perspective, I'm like, there's no way we can launch an app with this limited capabilities. And so we had finally passed that bridge where we launched with full check-in and obviously booking and in journey experience at the airport. And it's interesting how mobile fundamentally shifted the behavior, like you're saying, of users.
Mm-hmm.
Now that became the source of contact for anything. And it's interesting how business models had to change. You talked about the App Store. We had to talk about our back-end support systems, contact centers to support not just the user experience, but customers, as they were traveling across their journey, in our case, airlines, and obviously in your case, the banking and financial space.
Yeah, really interesting. It's funny. I also remember this was when we introduced that app was the only time in my life that my job was cool in my kids' eyes. There was one week when the Bank of America app was downloaded more times than Angry Birds.
Oh my God. Take that, Angry Birds. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, that's memorable when your kids think you're cool for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten there. Yeah, that's great. Okay, moving on. Can you share like a personal story or an anecdote that highlights how the role of the CIO has evolved over the course of your career? Like, what do you believe are the most pressing challenges and exciting opportunities to kind of follow on that? So you share, if you could share the story, and you could also share what are the most pressing challenges that are upcoming for CIOs, that would be awesome for our listeners to understand.
Sure. It's interesting. When I was early in my career, I thought I would never want to be a CIO. Back then, it seemed like the CIO was bogged down with back office stuff. He was worried about the financial systems and the HR systems. And I was much more interested in kind of consumer facing technologies. But it's been interesting to watch it change over the year as technology has moved from the back office of most companies to really being kind of the nervous system and the circulatory system of most companies. The role of the CIO has changed a lot. He really is, in my opinion, every company worth its salt has the CIO or the top technology person sitting at the executive table, at the CEO's table, because it is so critical to virtually every business these days. So that was a big change for me, and when I really kind of got interested in pursuing those types of roles. You asked about challenges. I think what's challenging now is for a CIO, how do you stay close enough to the business to advise them and to really be that consultative person that they work with day in and day out, but also stay close enough to the technology to really, stay abreast of it and learn where you should be investing your time, prioritize which technologies are really going to be most beneficial. We all have limited time, limited budget. And so how do you balance your time to stay close with business and close enough to technology to really kind of chart the course and decide where to invest your time? I think the biggest opportunity now for CIOs is we can be game changers in virtually any business. We're no longer in the back office. We are literally making the business function better, faster, cheaper. We are the business.
Absolutely. And then I would imagine that as now you've shifted in your career now, I know you're on several advisory boards looking at potential opportunities for the company that you advise, and you see other CIOs also looking at their challenges. Now that you're in a position of advisory versus now being in the hot seat with CIO, like what are you seeing their challenges? Like what is the hottest challenges that you see from an advisory perspective?
Probably similar, kind of staying abreast of the new technologies. It's all moving so much more quickly than it did 20, 30 years ago. How do you spend your precious time focused on what's most important? And how do you give that strategic advice to the companies you're advising? It's a big change when you move from, an execution role as a CIO to a strategic role. And I think many of us who are making that transition or who have made that transition struggle to not be in the execution lane, to really let the business leaders and the technology leaders run the business, and really have us focus more on that higher level advisory and strategic kind of consulting services that we can provide.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if you look back on your career, is there a specific accomplishment or project that stands out to you as meaningful, rewarding? And we'd love to hear that story. And if there's any kind of key leaders that were involved with you that inspired you along the way, or key technology initiatives that were completely memorable, that's what the listeners would really love to understand. I'm sure there were dozens that you can call out, but is there one or two that really kind of stand out for you?
For sure, the one project that stands out boldest in my mind over a 44-year career, it was 1998, and I was kind of a mid-level manager. I think I was a director at the time at Sabre, and I remember it was late summer, probably September, and my boss came to me, and Sabre had just signed a big deal with US Airways. They were going to outsource all of their systems to Sabre. Not just the reservation system or flight operating systems, but every single system in the airline, all the way down to payroll and everything that ran that airline. There were 307 different systems in total. And I remember my boss called me into his office and said, Tom and I talked about this, and we would like you to run this entire program. said, Brad, thank you very much. I'm flattered, but I'm not ready for this. Thank you anyway. I can't take that on. Naively, I left his office thinking it was done. And I got called in the next morning at 8 o'clock with the same question. And I realized that he wasn't asking, he was telling. And Manoj, it was embarrassing. It's one of only 2 times in my entire career that I cried in my boss's office. I was just so terrified. It was so big and daunting, and just all of those moving parts. There were going to be 4,000 people at Sabre working on it at one time, and a whole airline. It all had to cut over the same night because all the systems were intertwined. And at the same time, our kids were 6 and 10, and I thought about, what am I going to do? I have to be in Washington Mondays. We left every Sunday night and got back home every Thursday night. For 60 weeks, I did this. And so it was just daunting. And it was the hardest project I've ever worked on.
60 weeks.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was tough. I missed all of kind of 1st and 5th grade for my kids and half of 2nd and 6th grade. But it was daunting, and it was, stressful, and we all worked our butts off. And, I wish I was the kind of person who couldn't eat when I was stressed. Instead, I gained 25 pounds, eating and drinking too much that whole year. But it all culminated on that night of December 7th of 1998. And we got everything done, and everything had to cut over at once. We did it at a time when there were the least number of kind of things going on in the airline. I think we started the cutover at midnight, and I think there were only like 15 aircraft in the air at that time with 2,200 souls on board. But it was daunting to think about planes taking off under one system and landing under another, and just all of the details. We had all this backup. We kept thinking, what if we can't print boarding passes? So nobody will remember this. There used to be these little sheets in an airport where they would pull off a tab to tell you what seat you were in. Okay, you're in 22B, you're in 13C.
Oh, okay.
And we ordered thousands of those sheets so that we could manually do boarding passes if we had to. We had all kinds of backup procedures about how we do weights and balances manually if we had to. It was the most exciting night of my life. Don't tell my husband I said that. It was sitting in this command center with all the people at US Airways. The CEO was there, and the CIO, and everyone. And it really went off better than any of us could have hoped. There were hiccups, and we worked through them, but man, it was exciting. And it just, sometimes it amazes me to think I almost passed up that opportunity. If my boss hadn't been smart enough to see that I was ready and capable to do that, I wouldn't have had it. And really, that not only was it a great experience for me, but it changed the trajectory of my career. So kudos to him. That one of the great bosses I've had over the years.
I was going to call that out because I think as great leaders, if it's like seeing those kind of opportunities for our team members to then change the trajectory of their careers, like you're saying, like he saw something in you to manage a 4,000 person, 60-week project, may have not done something that size, but he's like, there's definitely something in Joan that could get there. And it would have been interesting to see from his perspective, what are those key attributes that he saw that said, she can rise to it, and she's totally capable of doing it. And that trust that he had in you, and you took it and ran with it. What an amazing story.
Yeah, it really was. And it's funny. I went to him afterwards when it was all done, and we were all kind of, back home and happy and everything was well. And I said, Brad, clearly there are other people in this company who were more experienced than me. Why did you choose me? And he said, you had enough experience, but we also knew that you could just rally people, and that you would have everybody in the company kind of, ready to try to do everything they could to make this happen. So he kind of saw a combination of technology, but also people skills that I think he knew would be important in it. So it was really exciting.
It's one of those moments in your career, because you mentioned the month and the year, and you mentioned the time. I'm sure you know the day exactly as well, because it's one of those times, I'm sure there were probably dozens of people around you as you were launching those systems. And I've done something like that, but nowhere near that size. But it's those times where you kind of lock arms with your team members.
Yes.
And you push the button, or you launch something massive, and you deal with whatever comes at you. And the amount of chemistry that builds as you go forward, and how important that is just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. Those people that were in that command room with me that night and that worked with me for that year, to this day, we still get together and we talk about it, and we have a cup of coffee or a drink and kind of enjoy the memories.
War stories. It's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Last kind of question as we wrap up here. So I know you've mentored several like visible minorities and women. So what unique advice do you typically give them based on your experiences and insights to also reflect back and also say, these are some of the lessons that I could share with you to put upon you as you take your career forward?
Great question. Yeah, and mentoring is so important. I think you and I may have talked about it. I'm still a huge fan of mentoring. In fact, I sit on the board of a nonprofit that provides mentoring and scholarships to non-traditional college students, specifically kind of women over the age of 24 who are starting college or going back to college. And the mentoring, most of them are first generation college students, so they really, really need a mentor. And just amazing to see the kind of things they accomplish with a little bit of help and somebody in their corner. Um, yeah, I don't know if my advice is different than most people's, but I think there's, as I talk to people, women and other minorities that I'm mentoring, I try to kind of remind them of three things that I wish I had known or done earlier in my career. And the first is, especially now, kind of embrace your differences. Your differences have made you what you are. 25 years ago, we all were supposed to act like white American men. It wasn't okay to be different. And the way we talked, the way we dressed, the way we acted, we were trying to be cookie cutters of each other. Now I think most smart leaders realize that it's the differences that kind of build a stronger fabric. Different experiences, different cultural backgrounds, different educational paths, different industries, all of those experiences help you make better decisions. So really embrace your differences, use them in your favor, and never be afraid to offer big ideas. The second thing I would say is really take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. Sometimes they won't be obvious why they're important, or you don't think you're up for them, like I was with the U.S. Airways story. But there were times when I was asked to take an opportunity that was maybe a much smaller job on paper. I went from leading a team of 800 to leading a team of 5 people because it was a very important strategic function the company was trying to develop. So if I had turned down any of those opportunities, I wouldn't have gotten the experiences I needed to kind of reach the places that I wanted to in my career. So really take advantage of every opportunity you're given. Then finally, I would say, and this is probably more for women than men, realize that there's never really a perfect balance. You're never going to feel balanced. You're always going to feel some level of guilt, and don't let that guilt kind of drive you down or have you make decisions that you wish you hadn't. It's never perfect. Those 60 weeks I spent on that project, I did a disservice to my family. I wasn't there enough, but luckily we found times over the years to make up for that. And luckily I had a partner, a husband who was there to pick up the pieces. So I would tell everybody, don't worry about the balance. Do it as you can and when you can. Rely on your support system, on your partner, on your spouse, on your siblings, on your family, on your friends. People will really come through for you. And in the end, it will work out. I missed a lot of things in my kids' lives, but they're now both adults and they're, good contributing members of society. They're happy and they're healthy. And I get a do-over because now I have grandkids that I get to do better with than I did with my own kids. But women will never feel balanced. I think men feel this to some extent. For some reason, we feel it more keenly as women. And we'll just have to accept it and do the best we can and stop beating ourselves up.
So many good tidbits in there. A couple that caught my attention is, and I kind of like to frame this as well because I'm big on diversity, especially
Yes.
hiring and having different perspectives. But I always say perspective is our strength,
Yes.
actually. The different perspectives we bring give us the capabilities to look at all sorts of problems with different angles, right? If everyone is the same, we'd all come to the same conclusion. And it's a perspective that makes us stronger.
Exactly.
And then you said something awesome in terms of taking as many opportunities as you can. And I know there's may have been times in my career, and I've noticed some of my colleagues, like we may have just said, you know what, I wish I could just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I'm good at this. I like this. And if I do something parallel, something different, you know what, it's not what I like doing.
Yes.
And really, if by trying those opportunities, by taking a shot, you're getting new perspective, new capabilities. And I think that's where growth is exponential. Now, you got to travel across the world, you got to take on massive projects, these global things that you learned along the way with different cultures, different technologies, different people, probably gave you a perspective of a lifetime. So when you came back, you were actually exponentially better than your counterparts anywhere because of this perspective you gained around the world.
Yeah, I hope so. And it really did. It was such an eye-opening experience for me early in my career to really work with people in different cultures. And I think I really did learn that perspective, that different perspective is so valuable.
Awesome. What a great way to wrap. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Joan, and sharing your inspiring insights experience with our audience. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Manoj. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's clear that as a CIO, you've been a trailblazer for the industry. So we thank you for that. And to all technology leaders, we hope that you found this conversation valuable. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope our discussions have sparked new ideas and possibilities. Until next time, this is Manoj for the Accolite Podcast, signing out.